John Bolton is Trump's former national security advisor. Welcome to our program, Ambassador Bolton.
Glad to be with you. Thanks for having me.
U.S. has imposed sanctions against Russia's two biggest oil companies, Rosneft and Lukoil. Also, Trump's administration has cancelled summit with Vladimir Putin in Budapest. President Zelensky said that Russia could lose up to $37 billion this year and up to $50 billion next year due to recent U.S. sanctions. What are the main reasons behind Trump's U-turn on Putin, and did Putin finally overplay his hand?
Well, I think Trump is obviously disappointed that his good friend Vladimir Putin, which is how Trump sees him, has not come through for him in these last 10 months of Trump's second term to arrange some kind of ceasefire or more lasting peace agreement with Ukraine. And I think this is these sanctions are obviously a sign of dissatisfaction. It's the right thing to do. On the other hand, I don't think it means and should not be interpreted as Trump now being on Ukraine's side. He has consistently refused to deliver the Tomahawk cruise missiles. I don't think it's completely ruled out, but by comments Trump has made, it looks very unlikely. And at the same time, he has said he would continue to sell other weapons and ammunition to European NATO members for transfer to Ukraine. All of this says to me, and it fits in with a pattern of Trump's behavior really even before the Alaska summit with Putin, that he's wanting to make a deal if a deal is there to be made to help his campaign for the Nobel Peace Prize. But he has realized that it's far more difficult to resolve the conflict than he said during the 2024 campaign. And not being successful leads Trump to think maybe he needs to withdraw. He wants to withdraw on terms that look favorable to him, hence the additional sanctions on Russia's Lukoil and Rosneft, as you mentioned. But it's more a way of extricating himself from the war than really declaring a position on it.
From your perspective, how harmful are these sanctions against Rosneft and Lukoil? Because both companies are trying to sell their foreign assets and have significant problems in operating, selling Russian oil. Also, there have been some reports that China, India, and Turkey have suspended some oil purchases from Russia. What is your take on that?
Well, if these sanctions are enforced vigorously, they could have a very, very significant effect, which raises the question, why didn't we put these sanctions on about 3 years ago? I mean, why have we waited this long? If the purpose is to deny Russia revenue from its international oil sales that it uses to finance the war in Ukraine, these targets were obvious years ago. Unfortunately, the best day a sanction has is the day it's announced, if it's not enforced very vigorously. So I think what we have to watch is how tough will the enforcement be? How will we view Chinese purchases of oil? As you mentioned, there may have been some slight downturn, but in the underground way, a lot of international oil transactions take place. China could find other ways to buy the Russian oil that we may not know about. And we've just seen in the example of Trump meeting with Hungarian leader Orban in the White House a few days ago, where he effectively gave Hungary a waiver to allow it to continue to purchase Russian oil, which we know from the past, in some cases, Hungary has bought and then sold on to others in the European market. So I think it's too soon to tell whether the potential effect of the sanctions, which is great, will actually be felt, or whether Rosneft and Lukoil and their purchasers around the world find ways to evade the sanctions.
Is the sanctions as the most harmful sanctions ever imposed on Russia? And do you feel that Trump used his most significant tool of leverage over Vladimir Putin?
Yeah, look, there's no doubt that without the revenue derived from the sale of oil and oil-related products, Russia would not be able to continue the war in Ukraine at anything like its current level. And indeed, I think would be hard-pressed to hold on even to the positions that it has at the moment. So a lot rides on this. And I think what we're seeing with the visit of Orban and others, with the visit of El Sharab, the new leader of Syria, that Russia has been working on to maintain its bases there. We're seeing a lot of indirect efforts by Moscow to try to find ways to lessen the impact of the sanctions. We probably don't know all of what Russia's up to because it's clandestine, but I do think there's a lot going on that we need to watch to see what the real impact turns out to be.
From your perspective, if these sanctions are properly enforced by US government, could this bring Vladimir Putin to the negotiating table?
Well, I hope so, but I'm afraid that at least within Russia, the narrative that you hear is that Russia really wants to win this war, and that the main criticism of Putin inside the country is that he's not been very effective on the battlefield, which is true. So it's an anti-war criticism only in the sense the critics are complaining they haven't won yet. And that may be where the real tension will come from economic constraints that may be imposed by these new sanctions versus the political reality in Russia that Putin depends on the war to stay in power in a certain sense, is what a number of astute Russian observers have concluded. So I think it's certainly better to have the sanctions in place than not in place, but just too soon to come up with a judgment as to what the impact will be.
Do you expect President Trump to impose additional sanctions on Russia, or even to provide Ukraine with Tomahawks missile if Vladimir Putin continues to delay ceasefire talks, to reject ceasefire offers from Trump?
Well, that's certainly what Trump should do. There's no doubt about it. But I don't think he's prepared to do that. And we're in an interesting political situation here in the United States where Democrats were very successful in the elections just a couple of weeks ago. Republican members of Congress are facing election 1 year from today. The economy is a little bit wobbly. People are worried about whether interest rates are going to rise or fall at the next meeting of the Federal Reserve. And so there's heavy pressure on Trump to disengage somewhat from international affairs and concentrate more on the American economy. As with everything with Trump, we don't know whether that will happen. But I could see him, as I say, because I think his real desire is either to make a deal in the Russia-Ukraine conflict that allows him to win the Nobel Peace Prize, or just go do something else. And it's that latter course at the moment that I think is more appealing to him.
Don't you think that President Trump has changed his attitude towards President Zelensky?
Well, I do think there's a much closer relationship between Trump and Zelensky than there was back in February at the time of that horrible meeting in the Oval Office. I give most of the credit there to Zelensky and the efforts he has made during the interim to try and explain better what Ukraine's position is. I think a lot of our European allies have weighed in very heavily as well. It's an awful lot of effort to get Trump to a position where he should have been from the beginning. But yes, I do think personal relations between Zelensky and Trump are much better. And in Trump's mind, since that is the equivalent of state-to-state relations, I think right now we're in a comfortable place in Trump's mind with Ukraine, not the place he should be, which is a clear supporter of Ukraine's effort to maintain its independence and territorial integrity, but certainly a lot better than where we were at the beginning of the administration.
Do you think that Vladimir Putin is a closer friend for Donald Trump rather than Ukrainian president?
Well, we know the relationship between Trump and Vladimir Putin, as with the relationship with Xi Jinping of China, with Kim Jong-un of North Korea. Trump likes these strong authoritarian figures for reasons that the psychologists can probably explain better than I can. I do think he's disappointed with Putin. I don't think there's any way you can avoid that conclusion, but I wouldn't say he's given up hope that eventually the way can be found that the parties would reach agreement. I think that's impossible given Putin's continuing demands for additional territory that he hasn't won on the battlefield, because of the fact it's Russia that's guilty of the unprovoked aggression here. There shouldn't be any reward for it.
Do you also feel that Vladimir Putin has convinced President Trump not to provide Ukraine with Tomahawk missiles, because it seemed for us that before this meeting in the White House between President Zelensky and Trump, that President Trump was to, just several days before signing green lighting Ukraine providing with Tomahawks missile?
Right. I think he was close to that decision, but the fact that Putin or someone moved him away from it is continuing evidence that with Trump, it's never over until it's over. And then sometimes it's still not over even then. There's been reporting that Viktor Orban, as part of his conversation with Trump, made an argument that Putin himself has made on many occasions, namely that Ukraine will lose this war. It's a matter of time. Some believe Putin thinks that the Russians will prevail in the spring of next year. And I think the advice that Orban and others may have given to Trump is you don't want to be on the losing side of this. It's taking time, but Russia eventually will win, so don't give the Tomahawks. I think that shows the importance of other European leaders telling Trump what is closer to the truth, which is that the Russian military performance continues to be a lot less than we ever thought during Cold War days, and that therefore more effective assistance and better strategy for those helping Ukraine could turn the tide of battle and show Russian troops retreating. That's the circumstance where I think most likely Putin would come to the negotiating table, and we're not there yet.
Also, according to the recent Sky News reporting, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has probably, at least temporarily, lost his seat at the Kremlin's top table. He has been sidelined after his recent phone call with U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio. What is your take on that? Did Lavrov overplay his hand? Even Vladimir Putin was angry on him.
Well, I think Putin thought he was going to get another summit, and he thought that, as with the Alaska summit, if he could sit down with Trump, he could work his KGB training on him, and he would get another couple of months reprieve. That obviously didn't happen. Now, whether that's Lavrov's fault or whether the position that he was expressing, which reflected essentially no change in the maximalist Russian view of what they want, we don't know. I am a little hesitant to jump too quickly to the conclusion that Lavrov is in the process of being purged. He has worked for Putin, both as UN ambassador and then as foreign minister, for a long, long time. It's possible that their relationship is broken down, but I just don't see the evidence for it quite yet.
And what is your take on current state of Putin's grip on power in Russia as he decides to continue this war against Ukraine and pursue his maximalist demands?
Well, it looks to me like that Putin's power remains essentially pretty strong. As I mentioned before, the main opposition to Putin is not from people seeking peace or a settlement with Ukraine. It's from people who want the war waged more effectively. And this plays into Putin's hand because he has said repeatedly that the war in Ukraine is a surrogate war. It's NATO that's caused the trouble, specifically the United States, so that continuing the war is critical for Russia's sovereignty and territorial integrity. The hard thing to judge is we don't really have a government in Moscow. It's something run by a criminal gang. I mean, even during Soviet days, there was a Politburo of the Communist Party, and after, for example, Nikita Khrushchev was basically humiliated in the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962, the Politburo could say, okay, Nikita, it's time for you to retire. There's no comparable body in Russia today. So the only way I can see a government changes is by a coup d'etat, by the security services, by the military intelligence. We won't know about that until the day it happens. So I think at the moment, Putin's hold on power looks relatively secure.
You just mentioned about the possibility of coup in 2023. Russia, Vladimir Putin would face the most serious threat to his regime. I mean, the Prigozhin march in Moscow, because but it seems like Putin has already eliminated all possible threats to his regime. If he continues this war against Ukraine for a while, could there pop up any other threats to his power regime as US continues to impose sanctions on Russia? Russia struggles economically, and more than 1 million people were killed or wounded in this war against Ukraine from the Russian side.
Well, I think that's right. It's very hard to understand from the outside why there's not more opposition to Putin from people who believe that this entire almost 4-year-long war now has been a disaster for Russia, which in most respects it has been. But there are many people in the diaspora, Russian exiles, former oligarchs, human rights advocates who make this point. But I don't see in that community, which knows what's going on inside Russia, I think as well or better than anybody, I don't see optimism from them in the short term that Putin is in trouble. We can hope for it. Certainly there are things we can do to assist the opposition, people who want to bring the war to a conclusion and withdraw Russian troops to their border. But it does not appear at this point like they are anywhere close to being able to take power.
Thank you, Ambassador Bolton, for your time and for your support for Ukraine, and glory to Ukraine.
Well, thank you very much again for having me. Good luck.